Welcome back to the Sport Life Balance podcast. Today, I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. We had the opportunity to speak to Karen Dommett, who is the General Manager for Special Olympics Canada Winter Games in Calgary in 2024. And she has such a great understanding and awareness of inclusivity in sport for both disabled and able-bodied participants. And I just had a great time talking to her about and trying to get a better understanding of how we can be more inclusive in sport. And Karen is also a mother herself, so some of her own experience with her kids in sports came into this. Some of her past growing up as a rural farm kid came into this conversation. And overall, it was just a great chat. So I know you'll enjoy this.
3, 2, 1, yeah!
All right, welcome to the Sport Life Balance podcast, Karen Dommett. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Yeah, awesome. So Nick from Kidsport Alberta kind of connected us, and we got to chatting and had a really great conversation, and it kind of went somewhere where we didn't expect it to go, and I'm really excited about that. So why don't we just start off by telling us a little bit about your childhood and the impact of sport growing up for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up very rural Saskatchewan, on a farm with not a lot of sport opportunities. I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers, and they didn't necessarily push or advocate too hard for sport. Our parents worked full-time off the farm as well as full-time farming. So they were really supportive of lots of extracurriculars. We did Boy Scouts and music and, whatever school sports were available. But yeah, they didn't minor hockey to drive to the next town over. That was not within a conversation of reason. If we did a sport after school, most times it was on you to find a ride home or make sure that it worked with the parents' work schedule. It was never deemed as a bad thing or anything like that. It was just we have this farm to run and this is the priority. But eventually, for whatever reason, they did sign off on allowing me to become a boxer, which is of all the unlikely sports that you would allow your daughter to do.
No kidding, right?
After being restrictive on some of those. So yeah, coincidentally, though, the boxing club was in Alberta. So I grew up really close to the Alberta border, but there's three of us Saskatchewan kids. So in order to know that I needed to make this work, I needed some other families on board in our farming community to be able to ensure that I would get to all the practices, because it was just not realistic given the workload that I would get there all the time before getting my driver's license. So got a couple families together, and 2 to 3 times a week we would drive to Acadia Valley. And maybe what was really familiar for them too is that our boxing coach was this old Western cowboy too. And it was just a bunch of farm kids that ended up boxing. So maybe it felt a little bit familiar territory. It wasn't, really high performance sport. It was just in an old elementary school. But yeah, we went on to compete at a pretty high level. We did, all the Alberta circuits, Western Canadian circuits. But, being a female boxer, in the, early 2000s, there also wasn't a lot of competition either. So you'd go to a lot of these events, and there wouldn't be somebody of your weight category or it'd be your fight category. So yeah, I think, you experience a lot of disappointment. And you see a lot of those inequalities really early on of the gender inequality in sport representation, that there just wasn't that many female fights. And if there were, you weren't often the feature fight. And if you were the feature fight, it was marketed in a really odd way of watch these girls duke it out. So yeah, as much as competing and being involved in boxing was, such a passionate driver for me, it was an eye-opening experience kind of throughout of it just felt like the system was just being born, and it was oh, we got more work to do. This is not where it needs to be.
Yeah, for sure. I can totally see that. One thing, just as you're telling that story, just kind of came to mind for me is like the way community can come together to support, someone's sport journey. So for you, like you knew you couldn't make it work on your own. Your parents wouldn't drive you 3 times a week into Alberta to train. It just, the capacity wasn't there. But you found friends that also were going to do it. And so cool for a small community to come together to allow people to do that. And doing that together probably just like brought you guys together, even you girls together, even like to a deeper level, friendship wise and like accountability, commitment wise. Like, tell us about that experience.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, there was 2 of us who were girls and then 1 guy. And yeah, like my situation was not unique, right? Like where we grew up, like everybody farmed, like it was farming community. So like nobody's parents had the time. So it was not as though like, oh, here's this poor kid down the road, like needs like some other family. Right. It was like, hey guys, if we want to play some sports outside of school, we need to get together and come up with this plan.
So did you kids come up with this plan together?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like pitching to our parents of like, yeah, like, here's how we're going to go about this. And like, the rotation of like, all right, so whose house do we go to off the bus on what days? And like the moms all had an agreement that's just like, fill these kids full of pasta. It's the cheapest option, sustain them the longest. Like, yeah. So the girl, her and I, to this day, like she's my closest friend. Like there was only, like I grew up very rural Saskatchewan. Like there's only 3 other girls in my class from kindergarten to grade 12. She was one of them, but yeah, so she still lives out in Saskatchewan. But yeah, the bond that we created of just like that traveling an hour and a half, or I guess 3 hours round trip, 2-3 times a week, and the road trips, and that, you're both training and competing and stuff on the same level. Yeah, it was just, so important to have like an ally and a partner, companion through that period. Yeah,
totally. That's awesome. I love how sport just can deepen our connection, our relationships, and how it lasts. I totally share that with you, with one of my friends. Like, even if we don't see each other for time, like I still consider him one of my best friends. And it's through that bond that we created, being together so often, competing together against each other. Like, so great.
Yeah, so, her and I had to have a few bouts against each other just of the lack of female competitors, and
what was that
relationship?
What was that like? Like my sport, ski racing against my best friend's pretty easy. Like we're both, it's an individual sport. We're both go do our thing and try to beat each other. But when you're trying to beat your friend in a boxing ring and it's like your best friend, what's that like?
Yeah, we would have like sometimes like an agreement going into it of like, all right, like let's just be like, let's make this a dance. Let's be strategic and graceful, and like let's just score points and like hits for like the right, make it finesse, and let's not try to hurt each other. And that would work like most of the time. If it was our hometown fight, though, in front of like the hometown crowd. So once a year, Acadia Valley puts on like this huge boxing card, it's called, and it's a big dinner event, and there's a stage and sponsors and all this. And so like everybody from our community would drive over, and the crowd was insane. It was the best fight of the year. And one time we got matched up there, and like first round, like we were like being friends and dancing around. And then when we both went back to our corners, I think both of our corners gave us the same talk of like, she's not your friend right now, like put on a show. And there's like a twinkle in the eye. And I remember she had a longer reach than me. She was a better boxer than me. And she cracked me one hard coming into the second round. I was like, all right, it's on now. Yeah. And it was probably our messiest tussle ever. But I do remember at the end, like the biggest hug ever. And it was just like, everything was just like left out on the mat. And, it never trickled outside of the ring ever.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's so cool. So tell us a bit more about what it was like having to advocate like to your parents for the opportunity to be in sport. Like, nothing against your parents. Obviously they had their commitments, right? Like they had to provide and put food on the table. So they're working, hardworking, doing the farm and other jobs, and you're coming to them and saying, I want to be in sport. Like, tell us a bit about why did you do you understand that urge? Where did that urge come from to be in sport? And then what was it like going to your parents and asking for that?
Yeah, it's so funny. I reflect on this often. I'm like, why was I the one to like vouch for this all the time? Like, where were my brothers? Like, why didn't they have this fight before me? But I just think it just wasn't necessarily the priority, right? That, I mean, just like culturally where I grew up, like you just farm, right? And it's what everybody does. And the whole community has like similar extracurriculars, and there's like the odd families that would get into minor hockey really heavily, and they were the hockey families. But then there wasn't typically much outside of that. Like most would do a little bit of after school sport and things like that, but there just wasn't a huge sport presence. And I know like neither of my parents really grew up with sport being a big part of their lives either. Like my dad played whatever school sports were offered, but he farmed his whole life. And yeah, like my mom comes from very much like a heavy music background, and like that was her passion and her safe place. So yeah, it was never those like deemed as a bad thing. It just wasn't on their radars. And I don't know, I can't like pinpoint like what was the experience that I had or the catalyst that like made me fall in love with sport. It just always has been like after every meal, like my brothers would go out and find chores to do, and we'd be like productive and helpful on the farm. And I was probably like the worst farm kid. Like I would just be shooting hoops in the driveway constantly, and like figuring out, like they'd be out building forts, and like, I mean, I obviously did some of that stuff too, but like, I'm like, let's make a hockey tournament in the driveway.
Yes.
I think so much of it, of like my passion or driving for sport or finding my place through sport, happened in isolation so much that like it was just, me in the basement. Like I was the kid that recorded Katrina LeMay Doan's final race on VHS, and like the Donovan Bailey race, and like watched it over and over again. And like those moments are just so like deeply ingrained in my memory that I think because I fought so hard for it and it didn't come like gifted to me, or wasn't necessarily overly supported, that it makes me just incredibly grateful for all the opportunities and things that I have from sport now, that the fight was not lost on me. And I think even now too, in all the major events that I get to do now, I get to bring my parents in as volunteers a lot, and they love it. And I think it makes that experience of sharing major sporting events with them now, and like the back of house side, even more special, because they didn't necessarily have the capacity to embrace it when I was a kid. When we first met, I shared the story with you of I got to go to track provincials because I placed fourth in an event, and the third place person couldn't go. They got sick. So now I got bumped up and I got to go to provincials. And I remember sitting in the tractor with my dad telling him like, all right, here's how we're going to do this. Like, I'm going to go to Regina on this day. He's like, well, no, I'm not driving you to go watch you lose. Like, we're in the middle of farming. So I just think like they just didn't get the opportunity to see those events and experiences. And now the more and more that I get to expose them to, and they get to see, I think social media helps a lot too, where they're starting to see like within their social networks, people's grandkids and stuff getting these experiences and traveling, and just seeing all the things that it gives back, and now seeing it through their grandkids too, that they're hugely supportive, and they're always talking about like when they quit farming, what's that next chapter, and what city are they going to buy a condo in, and what sport organization or event can they volunteer for? And so, they see it as part of kind of like their retirement plan as well. So
as a parent yourself now, how has that, like your experience growing up, impacted your relationship with your own kids? And I got asked, like, do they have your same love and like desire to play sports?
Yeah, for sure. So it's like a constant like balancing act of, because my husband and I come from very similar backgrounds. We both grew up in rural farming communities in Saskatchewan, that now we live in Cochrane, and we're just amazed constantly by the amount of opportunity we have. So where we were so limited in like, you just had a couple things to pick from, or you didn't even have choice, right? It was just like, here's the opportunity for this season. You do it or you don't. And now we're like, so many choices that it's been the balancing act of like, don't overschedule. You don't have to do everything. They are little, like there's time to introduce these things and ensure that like it's fun and we're not getting into too intensive activities or anything like that off the hop. So we were definitely really eager at the start. And I think with our oldest, we maybe got into a little bit of overscheduling just out of like, look at all the things we can do. Yeah. But yeah, definitely a different approach now that there's two. So my oldest just turned 7 and my youngest is 3.5. And yeah, they love sports. They love, like, they're outside all the time. And I think we've done a good job, I think, now of finding the right balance of like family activities and full family participation. And also finding the time too that us as parents, that we each individually have our own sports and activities too, that we don't just, we're not a kid's first family and we're not a parent's first family. We're a family first family. Yeah. So that there's equal opportunity for everybody and that they get to see and observe their parents being whole people and participating. They get to see us participating with them, and they get to see us on the sidelines telling them how fun it was to watch them.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, so well put. I love that family first family. I think I'm going to steal that.
I probably stole it from somewhere else. So.
Yeah. I totally feel that though. Even like outside of sport, just things that we do for fun. You know, we each have our individual things that we do for fun. And we have our things that we can do as a couple together that we both find fun. And we have our things as a family we can do that are fun. And it's important to understand those and be able to devote time to each of those, not just one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've even been having the conversations lately around like even just our home workouts that we would often be in a pattern of doing our garage workout or like doing a big row on the rower in the basement after we put the kids to bed. And you know we're not going to get the kids to fully participate with us all the time, and we still need to make it fun and optional for them. But, you know, on a weekend that like we do it in the morning and we do it as a family, and they have an option to build their own obstacle course, or they can like do a weightlifting or something like that if they want to, or it's just them building blocks in the corner and they're just around it. Or, you know, when they're having their wind down at bedtime and they're watching a show and having a bedtime snack, that's when we get the workout in, so that they're still around it and absorbing it and aware that this is the time that our parents are taking for themselves and that it's not always just done behind closed doors while they're sleeping. That's
great. I imagine that's not when you're doing your powerlifting with like your metal music blaring and like you're in the zone at bedtime.
My husband does. Yeah.
My kids would not go to bed, or else they would because they'd be like, this is too loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. So what are you most excited for, as a family, like as you venture through sports with your kids?
Yeah. You know, we've really made like a conscious decision, that unless there's like a really strong passion put forward by our kids to get into a particular sport in the winter, we're going to do our best to ensure that we have a multi-sport winter approach so that we can really dedicate winter family vacations to family ski trips, and that like we rent the house in Fernie, we spend a week out there, and like it's our sacred family time, and that nothing else should really get in the way of that, you know, pending career schedules and school schedules and things like that. But, you know, our oldest is really into skiing and he does play rec hockey, but he hasn't been super passionate about getting into minor hockey. We know that, you know, if that was a route to go, and there's, you know, not to pick on hockey, there's lots of sports that would impede, but like for us, we know that being on top of a mountain, breathing in that fresh air and just doing it recreationally for fun as a family, like has always built up our souls in our buckets. It's been such an important part of my husband's and I's relationship in getting out for hikes in the summer too. Like there's just something about being out in the mountains, and which is such a driver as to why we chose Cochrane. But I think we continue to just like romanticize and fantasize about like the day that 4 of us will all be independently on skis and snowboards on a mountain together is going to be a dream.
Yeah. I love that. Just like you hit home for me. That's
Right.
my sport, skiing. I have the same, like similar desire, like just that we can ski as a family. And it's such an amazing sport that you can each individually do, but you can do together. And it, you get the whole experience of like going away for the weekend or the week to the cabin, staying on the hill and living together and being at the ski hill, relaxing, playing together, and going out there and being on the top of the mountain in like just the most beautiful places, enjoying this amazing creation we have together. Like
100%.
yeah, so good. So let's shift gears here. Tell us about your involvement with the Canada Winter Games in 2019 and a little bit about the impact it had on you.
Yeah, for sure. It's been like the biggest inflection point in my career. So kind of prior to that, I was doing game day operations and kind of championship event style things in post-secondary athletics. Then when the opportunity came to Red Deer for the 2019 Canada Winter Games, it was an opportunity that kind of fell in my lap. I was planning to volunteer, and this position to be the manager of athlete services was presented to me. And I was super ignorant and didn't know what it was all going to entail. I had never done a multi-sport games event before, but it's been the catalyst to so many things now for me. But I have grown hugely in love with the Canada Games movement. And because for the reason that it is the only fully integrated sport model where parasport, Special Olympic sport, and non-disabled sport all take place in one event. So it's not 2 different weeks. It's not, spread out. The event itself is 2 weeks just because of so many sports, but parasports and Special Olympic sports and non-disabled sports all take place at the same time. So when you're planning your athlete's village, your dining hall, your medical services, your transportation services, you're doing all your plans and your logistics with the thought in mind that this needs to work for everybody, regardless of disability or ability. And I think that role going into that, where my job was to be the advocate for the athletes and ensure that we were putting on the best athlete experience possible for them off the field of play. There was far more smarter people than me that were in charge of the sport operations. I got to do everything outside of sport. But it's this promise and guarantee that we're going to create an experience for you that is going to be one of the top experiences in your entire life. That this should be a moment that you should cherish and hold. That should be like up there when you look back in your life experiences. Like, it's not going to trump, but it should be like in the same arena as like getting married, becoming a parent, like a major educational achievement. It should be within that arena of experiences of how impactful. And that's the power that it has to be. So when we're doing it in a way that it's inclusive for all abilities and disabilities, we're also promising to those who experience impairments or experience disability that we're removing all barriers and microaggressions that you face on a day-to-day basis in order to fully participate. Our promise and our guarantee as sport is that we're creating a safe place of belonging where you're free of those challenges and barriers. And admittedly, we've probably never actually fully got there. And I think, there's never been a perfect Paralympics. There's never been a perfect Canada Games. There's never been probably never perfect any type of sport event, right? There's always the behind the scenes things of things that went wrong or that you wish you would have done better. But for me, it was the constant eye-opening and learning, and that, we shouldn't necessarily just only be doing this in sport, and we shouldn't only be doing it when we know there's a para athlete or Special Olympic athlete showing up, because any parent, any spectator, any coach, any athlete at any time should have the right to participate or spectate or volunteer and do so fully with accommodations if they have a disability or not. Yeah, it's just that constant entering conversations with service providers and contractors and things like that, where you would get met back with the typical ableism response of, well, we could just put all the wheelchair users in this room and then we don't have to worry about that we only have one roll-in shower. They could all just share and like we could put 2 in a king bed, right? And that would be fine. It's like, well, no, that would not be fine. We would never say that about a non-disabled athlete. We have strict policies about that they can't share beds. So no, that's not good enough. We have 2 years to figure this out. Let's solve this problem around roll-in showers and find a way to actually accommodate all the athletes. So it's just, and that's just one example of many comments that you come across in that planning process. And there's just so many moments that have been etched in my memory and on my heart of like, holy smokes, we got a long ways to go. Like, we need to do better as a society. But the positive that I take away from it is that Red Deer has changed as a community as a result of those games, that we did make a lot of improvements and that we did get a lot of things right. And that we had a lot of those tough conversations and we trained our volunteers accordingly. And we worked with the athletes and coaches and the chef de missions that we got to a really good place. Mm-hmm. And I think anyone that's involved in sport in that community now, or that works in those venues or those hotels or things like that, that I'd like to think that a lot of folks have been changed forever because of their learnings of that inclusive sport model.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I never really considered the impact. Like, you always think about the economic impact on the community when you host an event like that. Like, it's a miniature Olympics, right? Like, mm-hmm. all of these people are coming and there's press and there's other things like, but the impact that stays in the community through the learning or through the observing and just being around or involved in volunteering in the games, like that's so cool. And I'm really glad you made that point to how the learning about inclusivity hopefully has stayed in that community, and you believe it has. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so fast forward now, I'm now the general manager of the Special Olympics Canada Winter Games in Calgary in 2024. And that's one of our staple guiding principles in every conversation that we do as an organization and as an organizing committee, is in every conversation that we're having and partnership that we're forming, is that disability inclusion is involved in the conversation, so that we're not just checking a box, that we're not just renting this venue, but what does hosting this particular event in this venue mean for you and your staff? And where are your shortfalls? Where are your nervous points right now? What do we need to do to support you as a venue, as an organization, to become more disability inclusive? And what will your legacy be beyond this event? Mm-hmm. Will you feel prepared and competent to be the host of this disability specific sport club beyond these games? Can we look at co-sourcing equipment that's going to be a legacy item that will stay here, that will allow for more disability inclusive sport organizations to come here as a venue? Will you use the revenue that you've generated as part of this event to support the creation of future disability inclusive sport and recreation programs? So yeah, it's taking that the games is a big thing that we need to host and do, and there's a lot of logistics we need to check off, but what is our lasting legacy socially in our community and changing perceptions of persons with disabilities beyond just the week of the games?
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's such an undertaking to host and create that event. And like you said, the level that these games can be at, to be such a memorable moment for some people. And I myself was in fact at a Canada Winter Games back in 2007 in Whitehorse, and it is definitely a huge memory for me. But I just want to bring up a conversation we had previously that, you were talking about participants, how that experience is maybe their only like major experience. And after that, they might not have anywhere to go. Whereas able-bodied sport participants like myself had many other things like beyond Canada Winter Games that we could look ahead and look forward to and aim for. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So the story I had shared in our previous conversation was walking into the Gary W. Harris Canada Games Center in Red Deer, which was one of like our new builds for the games, and a legacy venue that will stay in the Red Deer community. Huge venue. Absolutely beautiful, huge stadium seating around the basketball court. And the wheelchair basketball gold medal game, admittedly, it was an Alberta game, so maybe had like a little bit of like a biased draw into filling the stands. But, now that I say that, I'm pretty sure the men's gold medal hockey game was also an Alberta game too. So, but those two events were like the two marquee events, was the wheelchair basketball gold medal game and the men's hockey gold medal game were the two major attended events. The atmosphere, though, in Gary W. Harris Center was electric. It was, bar none, the best atmosphere of the whole 20 days of games across 19 sports. That was the best atmosphere. It was wild. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, tears were running down everyone's face of, like, just, you could feel this energy. And, they're all lifting up the chairs and cutting down the net. And like, it's super emotional, right? That you see, like, they left everything out on the court. And for so many of the spectators, it was the first time they'd ever even witnessed a wheelchair basketball game. And they're witnessing this magical moment on like this highest level of wheelchair basketball sport in our country. And yeah, it's super emotional. And I remember just sitting there thinking, though, like, but this could be the ceiling. Like, for most of these athletes, there might be some that will go on and play on national team and play internationally, but that's the only avenue. Like, every other sport that is here that is a non-disabled sport, they will get to have the opportunity to play CCAA or U Sport or some sort of post-secondary. They will have different circuits within their NSO to be on national levels, to do international level competitions, that there's a number of different circuits. There's different sponsored circuits. There's the traditional sports circuit. And for these guys, this is it. Or there's like the small percentage that they might make it on the national team, or maybe they move to another country and play internationally. And yeah, I just remember sitting there thinking of like, thank goodness I get to be part of this moment that created this moment, because this will be a top moment forever. But we also, like, we can't accept that as the end of the road. We need to create more stages and more opportunities for there to be more places for parasport to grow. And, we have a systemic issue there, though, right? That like the whole system needs to be rebuilt, and we need to relook at it, because we do a really poor job at creating grassroots opportunities that are sustainable with meaningful pathways of participation for individuals with disabilities. We do these try-it programs without necessarily pathways for people to go, or their only pathway is really short and it's a really high performance route. We don't have recreational opportunities necessarily. So then we weed people out, and we've also done a really bad job of marketing to people with disabilities the entry point, right? Because lots of times the entry point is at that highest level. Like, there's no pathway to become on the national sit volleyball team. You are on the national sit volleyball team, or you're not. There's no other sit volleyball stream right now. I think throughout the pandemic, there's a lot of like think tanks and groups and stuff going on, that there's some more hubs popping up in communities throughout Canada, and hopefully we'll see some more. But we have a long ways to go to create the system that is sustainable. And I think a really big part of it is getting accessible information to parents at that young age, because they just don't know that sport is for them.
Yeah. Does sport inclusivity to you go beyond just disabled sport participants? Or is there a bigger meaning to inclusivity in sport to you?
That's a great question. I would say yes. And I think it, going back to like the start of our conversation, and, that my experience as a young female boxer, that, I missed out on certain fights because the other girl didn't make her weight, or I didn't make my weight. And, so then it was just an exhibition fight or no fight at all. Yeah, that, I look at it from even just a parenting lens right now. So my 7-year-old has decided to just play rec hockey and not minor hockey, because he likes to play, but he doesn't like love it. It's not his passion. So it's not worth it for our family to get up at whatever hour every single weekend. We choose to sleep in and do like a fun family skate or a once a week program instead. So for him, because we've made that decision now at 7, he's limited in his options to then come back at, say, age 11 and decide that he does want to play minor hockey. Mm-hmm. So I think, systemically, we have an issue there too, where a kid should not be punished at the age 12, 13, 14 for a decision that they made at 7, 8, or 9 years old. Yeah. That they shouldn't be restricted and excluded from participating in that sport. Yeah. Because the stream, the high performance stream or the minor sports stream, doesn't allow them to then enter if they haven't been going through the developmental program all the way along. Mm-hmm. And I think, we have little diamonds in the rough in some programs that have better opportunities to let people in, or some sports are deemed as more like late entry, or some individuals, if you just have like a generally athletic background, you can get in. But oftentimes you just find you lose a way of playing a sport, right? That there isn't just like a way to still play without it being like on the provincial development team. Right. So I think that applies to everybody. I'm very hyper aware of it in the disability community. In particular, we have a huge growing population of individuals that identify as neurodivergent. So individuals who would have an intellectual disability, or on the autism spectrum disorder, have a sensory processing difficulty, some sort of social development delay. And so it's these individuals who will often start out in sport with their typically developing peers at the same age, but then they get aged out. So when things start to get competitive and into tournaments and travel and things like that, then that kid doesn't earn their spot anymore because they're perhaps developmentally delayed or not able to socially participate at the same level as the non-disabled kids. But they may have the same passion and love for the sport. Their ability just might not be at that high performance level. So then they get segregated out. And then where do we have an option for them? So if you're a fully able-bodied child who's neurodivergent, then wheelchair basketball isn't a solution for you, but minor basketball is no longer a solution for you. Where do you go? Where is our autism-friendly basketball program? Or for families too that, they may deem their child as higher functioning on the autism spectrum. And I know that's like a controversial term to use, that not everyone identifies with it. Some parents I've spoke to, though, through my previous role with Calgary Adapted Hub, would use that term to describe their child. And they just want them to have a place to play. And they don't identify with disability-specific sport as being their safe place. And that's okay too. I think there's a huge spectrum there that disability-specific sport serves a lot of people really great because it removes the barriers and it creates a safe place, sense of belonging, that everyone feels like they're on the same page and they're there for the same reasons. And there's other people that feel like that's actually limiting them, that, they don't feel like that's their safe place of belonging. So, but then they've been excluded from traditional sport. So where's our gray zone? And I think that gray zone applies to more people than just those who are disabled. It's those who have exited sport or wanted to try a new sport at age 13, right? Like if we just had more recreational sport opportunities that were maybe recreational isn't the right term to use anymore, but that's still like true sport that's just inclusive.
Yeah, it's such a big topic to unpack and so much work to be done, as you said in that. I love what you said though. Like you had some great, analogies, or just way of explaining what inclusive sport could be. And I hope one day we can get there or improve. I think improvement is the first step. And I think we're probably there. We probably have improved from where we were years and years ago, but that's not good enough, right?
Yeah, I think, there's another side of the coin too, that we need to also support our sport leaders more too, right? Mm-hmm. So we're sitting from this high horse of like, sport needs to do better for us. And we come up with these statements and stuff around safe sport policies and things like that, we're telling all the sport organizations, the NSOs and PSOs, where it's coming from the NSOs and it's going down to the PSOs and the local sport organizations, that they need to be adhering and complying to all these things, and for all the right reasons. But we haven't increased anyone's capacity or resources yet and we're not supporting those sport leaders and organizations to get there. We're not giving them the roadmap or the tools or the resources well enough to get to a place where they feel safe and confident and competent. Because if you're not someone who has lived experience with disability, it is scary and intimidating, right? Everyone's scared to misstep and make the wrong move. So, you know, people aren't doing enough out of fear, and that fear is justified because, you know, there's all the systemic reasons, and, you know, you can argue and say, no, it's not justified and there is no good reason. And I do agree with that there is no good reason to not be more inclusive. But, you know, if we think of how our generation is all raised, you know, if you saw someone who was different on the street and, you know, someone using a power wheelchair and you've never seen that before, your reaction as a child is to point and be like, whoa, what is that? Like, Mom, what's going on over there? Why is that guy using that thing? I've never seen that. And then your parents' reaction was, don't point, we'll talk about it in the car. Just like, don't say anything, like, keep quiet. So you were shushed and you were told disability was bad and don't look and don't talk and don't, like, we do not acknowledge that thing. Look away. So then now we're the adults that are in charge and we're supposed to be making this change, but our entire upbringing and conditioning was be fearful. So that's where I say, like, I think the fear is justified because we've been conditioned for so long that way. But now is the time to be introspective and challenge that conditioning and think about, you know, now we're the parents of the kids and the kids who we want to be better and more inclusive, or we're the parent of the kid with the disability. So it's our job to make these spaces safer and to support each other in creating safer places.
Yeah, for sure. I can't help but I got to bring this up because that example you gave is perfect, and just the way we are taught through experience and through our parents, it just so connects to what are called money scripts, which is something that I deal with often with financial planning clients. And, you know, the way our beliefs about money have been shaped by our childhood is unbelievable. And we hold these beliefs until we bring awareness to them and intentionally choose to disregard those beliefs or change those beliefs. And I think it's sounding like it's kind of similar on the example you just gave about just, you know, ignoring, shushing the person with a disability.
Yeah, 100%, right? It's that whole, like, you got to name it to tame it.
Yeah, totally. Oh, man, this is so great. So I want to ask you about Calgary Adaptive Hub. So before we get into, like, the detail of all, like, what you did there and what they do, I just want to ask you, do most families, most parents with a disabled child, do they understand that there is a sport option for them? Yeah,
yes and no. So I'll take this opportunity to also provide, like, a little bit of a hopefully a safe and welcoming teaching moment. So instead of using the term disabled child, we would typically use, you know, disabled is not a bad word, but just encouraged to use people first language. So a child with a disability, it's not like a very minor nuance there, but I just think these platforms are a great opportunity to shed a light on that. So, and thank you for being open to this. I know we talked about this beforehand, that you know, we'd make this a safe place to correct each other if needed.
Totally. Yep.
It's a mixed bag, right? So, some parents are really aware, about, like, I think for the most part, people generally understand, like, what Paralympics are and what Special Olympics are. But they don't often know that there can be opportunities outside of that. And they don't know that there are pathways to there. Like, I think we've done a really good job of marketing the Paralympics, and, like, you see oftentimes in, like, the corporate commercials that run during the Olympics and Paralympics, it's like the inspirational stories of the individual who was a high performance athlete, but then sustained an injury. And then 2 years later, they're now on the international stage and they're, like, a world renowned Paralympian. But that story doesn't resonate for the parent of the child with a disability who was born with a disability.
Right.
You know, that's like, oh, okay, so if they're in a car accident, like, sweet, we've got this route to go. So we need to do a better job of, like, normalizing that, like, there's different types of disability and there's different areas of opportunity, and that it's not only high performance. Like, I think a lot of parents get intimidated by parasport because they think their child has to be classified and, you know, they have to fit in a certain box, and that their disability has to be a certain way and their function has to be a certain way, or that their level of understanding needs to be at a certain level. But that's true once you're competing for the country, but that's not where you're starting. Mm-hmm. You have opportunities at a grassroots level.
Yeah. So with Calgary Adaptive Hub, what was your role there? And how does that play into this whole conversation of parents and their awareness of sport opportunities?
Yeah, so Calgary Adapted Hub, powered by Jumpstart, was my next gig after the 2019 Canada Winter Games in Red Deer. So after that contract ended, yeah, really, like I said, it was a catalyst to really focusing on disability inclusive sport. So it was a startup collective opportunity between 7 organizations in Calgary that are looking to enhance and create more inclusive and adaptive sport and recreation opportunities for all children and youth in Calgary. So it's primarily like the big facilities, so like WinSport, Vivo, the MNP Community Sports Center, the university, so University of Calgary, Mount Royal University, and then Sport Calgary is kind of the parent organization, and then the City of Calgary supports as well. So it's taking this model where these large kind of venues that have a lot of the tools and resources would be the catalyst to enhancing and creating more disability inclusive opportunities. Because there's so many clubs and groups out there that are already doing so much work, but they don't have the backbone support of facilities necessarily, or the equipment or the registration software. So it's a lot of volunteer organizations, so like wheelchair sports, like Autism and Asperger Friendship Society, where they do lots of different sport recreation programs, or Ultimate Parasports, all these different groups that, or like sport specific clubs, or, like the PSO clubs that needed a place to kind of remove all these barriers so that they could then try it on for size and test out and start to explore and figure out how they're going to become more inclusive. So that's kind of how it started. And then, so my role was, I was the director of the Calgary Adapted Hub, and we paired everything we did with a research partnership with the University of Calgary. And I'm speaking in past tense, but they still exist. I've moved on now to take this Gabe's role. So everything's done with research in mind, so that everything is evidence informed as well, so that it's sustainable and measurable, and that we're ideally creating a system that can be replicated across Canada and across communities across Canada with some really hard data and research behind it. But what we started to find really early on was like, we could pump out all the programs we want to, right? Like generating programs, everyone knows how to do. But if the parents don't know about it, or we're just going to the same people that have always come to these types of programs, we're never growing sport. We're not actually fixing the problem. Right. So what we ended up doing was kind of after a launch was then creating a parent intake form where I would just meet one-to-one with parents and get to know them on a very individual level about their child. And sometimes the kid would participate in the calls and, self-advocate. Yep. Sometimes they just weren't old enough, or their ability didn't allow. And then coming up with a game plan and a roadmap for them of, all right, here's what exists. And then it also really informed where our gaps were too. So where we needed to direct our funding and our efforts as the Calgary Adapted Hub, to then say, all right, we're starting to see this trend that there's interest in this area, or this particular type of disability is being underserved, or we don't have enough adapted swim lessons, or whatever it is. So yeah, it was really cool. I'd say like the best part of it was doing those one-to-one program navigation calls with parents. And, you're actively getting people in sport who never thought that sport was for them. And like, we all know the benefits of sport, of what it does for our bodies, our minds, but what I've talked a lot about in this interview too is like the sense of belonging and the social tool that it provides, provides a safe place of welcoming and belonging and purpose. And that's something that these families just never knew existed. So in the close to 100 families that I got to speak to in the year of doing those calls, almost half their children had never participated in any type of sport or recreation extracurricular activity ever before, which is crazy to think about that like half of the families were just not accessing sport because they had no idea where to start. And you see why, right? Like it doesn't pop up when you Google it. You know, like you could find wheelchair basketball, but again, like if your child has autism, that doesn't solve your problem. Mm-hmm. And if a program says inclusive to all abilities, what does that mean? Does that mean a mobility restriction, or does that mean an intellectual impairment? So yeah, you need to have that one-to-one individualized approach. And there's always been lots of talk of like, well, can't we just have like a website listing or an app that fixes all this? But, you know, I do advocate strongly against that you could on a piece of paper have two identical sets of answers, but the family situation and dynamics and just the individualized nature of disabilities, you could have two totally different outcomes of what that family's looking for. So I think it does need to be really individualized.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. An intake form does not solve and answer all of your questions. It cannot replace one-to-one human interaction and seeing that engagement, that relationship. Yeah. So if any parents are listening who might have a child with a disability, what advice would you give them as far as it relates to, you know, they're on their journey trying to find out where their child can fit into a sports system? What advice would you give for them?
Yeah. So unfortunately, not every community has a Calgary Adapted Hub yet. Hopefully, that's something that will continue to grow, and that Jumpstart will continue to support, invest in other communities. But it's very much, you know, a new pilot project. But yeah, I think, you know, leaning into what is the sport that your child is interested in, or, you know, if they've had the opportunity to become interested in anything, lean into those opportunities. If you find that they have a particular interest in something, go talk to those minor sport organizations and try to have a conversation with them and approach it as an ally, that you know that this is a large undertaking for them. They maybe don't have experience in this area, but you would like to co-create it with them. I think that is music to a lot of sport leaders' ears when a parent is saying like, hey, we think we could help make your club more inclusive. We would like to be the family that supports you in getting there. And that's easier said than done. A lot of parents and families have been down this road a lot of different times. They've been part of different trials and test projects where like that's an exhausting piece of advice to hear, where they're like, no, I don't, like we've been the guinea pig so many times. Like I do not have the time or energy to hold someone's hand and be the guinea pig again. So that maybe isn't the solution for everybody, but for some families that will be the right way to go, is being the catalyst to creating change in a sport organization in your local community. For others, then if it's looking for what already exists. So in Calgary, Sport Calgary hosts All Sport One Day and All Sport One City, where they're different try-it events. So you get to just do free try-it days of all the different sports. And I know lots of different communities have that. So go out to those free try-it days and have those conversations and learn from each of the organizations, like what is your level of adaptability and your ability to put in accommodations, and where could our child fit? Do you have a program? And if they don't, it's then often a catalyst to then getting answers. So then ideally, you're not the first person that's asked that question, and then they're able to say, yes, let's explore this more, or yes, here's our answer, or no, sorry, we're not there at this time, but this is the group that is really good at that. There is a lot of parent Facebook groups out there that can help point in directions. But truly, like if you're Alberta-based listening to this, connect with the Calgary Adapted Hub, connect with Rocky Mountain Adaptive. They make the mountains accessible in all outdoor activities. I cannot speak highly enough of Rocky Mountain Adaptive. Talk to Special Olympics. They're in almost every community. And although Special Olympics is dedicated for individuals with intellectual disabilities, they can often be a connector and a catalyst to sports for individuals that may experience other disabilities. In Edmonton, there's the Steadward Center, which is a great connector and resource. There's Wheelchair Sports Alberta. Yeah, there are a lot of different resources out there, but I'm not going to lie, it's not a plug and play answer. It's not an easy solution, but I think, if you're a parent and if sport is important to you and to your family structure, you do need to be the advocate for your child, and you need to be the teammate to the sport leaders and present them with the options that, I'll walk this journey with you, and we're maybe not always going to get it right, but let's explore the opportunities and resources together, and let's look at different grants that are out there, right? Because it can be mutually beneficial to the sport organization too. There are a lot of grants out there that will support this work of getting specialized equipment and going for extra training. So the burden shouldn't always be on the parent, but I think the parent can be the catalyst to a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, so well said. Yeah, that's so great, Karen. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we had the chance to have this conversation today, and just to bring some more awareness to inclusivity in sport and all these different avenues of disabled sport. And yeah, I just thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for this opportunity. This is super fun.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Sport Life Balance podcast. We hope this episode inspired and encouraged you as you navigate the demands of sport and life. Be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen and leave us a review. We would greatly appreciate it. You can also find us and follow along on Instagram at The Sport Life Balance. Until next time, wishing you all the best in your sports journey.